You're listening to Agile Ideas, the podcast, hosted by Fatima Abuchi. For anyone listening out there not having a good day, please know there is help out there. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Agile Ideas. I'm Fatima, CEO at Agile Management Office, Mental Health Ambassador, and your host. Before we get into today's podcast and talk about today's podcast guests, I just wanted to remind you that in case you're not already aware, I have launched the PMO Playbook newsletter. Details and access to the PMO Playbook will be mentioned in the show notes, but the PMO Playbook was something that I decided to put together and curate specific content and how-tos in and around projects in PMO. For example, some of the plays that I've include how to set up and run a pipeline management process, the most important process and most requested by all clients I've worked with over the last 8 years, and how to set up and manage a dependency management process, also another challenge area for a lot of companies. In this PMO Playbook newsletter is curated content, very specific, detailed how-tos, and that will be able to provide you insights that you can literally copy and paste and use in your day-to-day, as well as other curated content and insights that I'll continue to share. You can find details about it in the show notes. Now on to today's guest. So today's guest, all the way from the Netherlands, is Maarten Dalmijn. He is someone who helps teams to beat the feature factory all over the world, and he'll tell us a little bit more about what that is shortly. Millions of practitioners have read his best practice articles on Agile, Scrum, and product management, and he's the author of the Amazon bestseller Driving Value with Sprint Goals in the Mike Cohn series. Maarten is a frequent speaker at Fortune 500 companies, government organizations, and international industry conferences. He's worked with many award-winning startups and scale-ups as well. So please join me in welcoming Maarten to the show. Maarten, thank you for joining us.
Super happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Your content, which we'll get into, is prolific and caught my attention. But before that, something else that caught my attention. Apparently you were in an Oscar award-winning movie. Tell us about that.
That's correct. Well, I mean, I was super young. I was like 2 years old or something. But this is the way my mom tells the story, right? So you have to keep in mind it's my mom. So she probably makes it sound nicer than this. But basically, there was some kind of ad in a Dutch newspaper that they were looking for babies for a Second World War movie. And I was selected out of hundreds of babies. And initially the idea was to just have a picture, right? You know, movies, they had these pictures of the family with like a baby. I was just going to be for that. But apparently they like me so much, this is how my mother tells me, that they put me in the movie. So I'm actually there. It's only a few seconds. But yeah, I mean, the movie is called The Aanslag, The Assault. And I'm like writing like something simple, like a tricycle or something. So yeah, amazing. It's pretty cool.
That is really cool. And it's a great opening line if you're at a party.
Yeah. I mean, who can say that, right?
Exactly. You know what? If you were someone else, you'd probably add it to your LinkedIn bio, a Oscar-winning actor.
Yeah, nowadays everybody puts I'm ex Meta, ex
exactly.
McKinsey,
even if they've been companies. There for 3 days.
Yes.
My
absolutely.
question is, why are you an ex? That's what I want to know. Oh goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that we got that clarification out of the way, I'm happy to dive into all things related to many things, but one of which I want to kick off with. What do you think is the biggest misconception when it comes to Agile?
Yeah. So what's very interesting is when you talk about Agile, everybody starts talking about the Agile Manifesto, right?
Yes.
And I get it, right? But
yes.
In my mind, Agile is much older than the manifesto. I mean, it's kind of like how do you say? Of course, they came together and they described kind of what their Agile approaches had in common. So even it was already older than the manifesto. But the other part to it is the ideas that are in the manifesto, basically responding to change over following a plan as one of the elements. Mm-hmm. They are far older and don't have their roots in IT. Mm-hmm. But they put the IT stamp on it. They linked it to the world. So for me, it's kind of like, yeah, that's what makes one of the biggest misconceptions, in my opinion. to start talking about Agile, you have to start with the Agile Manifesto. That's what defines it. Like, yeah. I'm curious what you're thinking.
I 100% agree. Unfortunately, there are many Agile purists out there, and with all the companies, that I've come across, they tend to usually reference that and make that's the starting point when it's not. I have a little bit of a slightly alternative view as well, in that for me, even though Agile itself has become a lot more mainstream in the last 8 to 10 years, I think is more popular. I think Agile's always been about agility and adaptiveness, and that's what
Yes.
I think it is. And so, yes, there's definitely a reference to something that is really well known, being the manifesto, and it's absolutely, great to see those guiding principles in there, but it doesn't mean that we need to be so rigid that we're trying to adhere to everything in that, because that's not the gospel for absolutely everything that is Agile. It's evolved a lot since then. So yeah, I agree with you, and I do think that is a big misconception and really pushed by a lot of Agile purists.
Yeah, and I get it, right? It's very comforting that you have this like document you can point to. It's the truth. But yeah, I mean, as you said, adaptiveness, that's the key thing. Like, I think that's the key, and that's I mean, maybe I don't know if all the listeners believe in evolution, right? But that's evolution already. That's adaptation. Evolution is the blind watchmaker, right? It doesn't look ahead.
Yep.
It cannot look ahead. What evolves is because it works, and it doesn't understand why. And that's kind of like Agile as well. Like, we do what works, and we discover it after the fact. But we have one big advantage. We can also predict and plan. We can also look ahead with our brains. So that's the big advantage. But in the end, it's about adaptation. Yes, I agree.
100%. And I think, the key thing as well is that so many people are spending so much time arguing and debating the what, instead of just focusing on how they apply the principles. And there's so many frameworks out there and methods based on Agile, and there's so much good out there, and also some not so good. So it's like picking and adapting those different things to suit you based on your maturity, your environment, your organization, as opposed to rigidly fixating. So I think that is definitely important. And the other one that I wanted to see if you probably hear a lot about is there is a lot of people that will say Agile is only relevant for software development lifecycle. It's only related to IT. And I find that one really difficult to accept, because it's not true. But do you hear that a lot? Do you think that that's also a misconception?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would agree. I think one of the key things, though, if you look at the manifesto, was kind of phrased in software development context. So if you take that very literal and say, hey, like, it's a manifesto for software development, but I think the basic ideas are applicable to other domains as well. I think the main thing is, if you can make a really good plan and you can execute it, then there are going to be no surprises. You don't need to adapt. Like, you can think all the steps ahead, and you're not going to make mistakes. You don't need Agile, and I think that's the key thing. There's this famous saying, right, from the military. I don't want to glorify warfare in any way. No plan survives contact with the enemy. If that's your situation, you need Agile, right? And that's the main thing. And yeah, I don't think it's helpful to say, yeah, Agile is only for software development. The ideas are the same. And for example, if you talk about the military concepts like Auftragstactik or mission control, I mean, they're very closely related to Agile, because they're trying to solve exactly the same problem. And yes, they're called differently, but in the end, they're trying to solve the same kind of problems, in my opinion.
And at least there's agreement on the problems that we're trying to solve. That's the key, starting with an understanding of what it is that you're trying to do, whether it's deliver value, which we'll get into, or solving a particular problem. But I think one of the big problems happening at the moment is appearing to be a lack of understanding for the C-suite. And I know you do training with the C-suite for introduction to Agile. What do you think is the biggest challenge for the C-suite to jump on board and actually really be able to support Agile initiatives?
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges is that there's a lot of talk about, I think, if they've heard about Agile before, right? Everybody has heard about it before. And I think one of the main challenges is they've probably heard about it in a way where somebody just started waving. I mean, I called it Agile splaining, right? Waving the Agile Manifesto in their face and why it's important. And I think that's totally the wrong starting point. Like, you should start with where they are, what they care about, what are their challenges, And then you should talk about, okay, so this is what we could do to help you resolve these obstacles or speak their language. And in the end, I rarely talk about agile. I don't drop the word agile because there's no need to. As long as I can help them solve their problems, why do they need to know that it's related to the agile? For me, that's not important because at the end of the day, we're talking about adaptation and course correcting and all these things. And everybody knows these things. You don't need to call it agile. I mean, everybody knows when they're like, for example, when you learn skiing, right? There's an element of thinking ahead, but you're trying and falling. So we all naturally understand these concepts to some extent. Yeah. So I think that's the key thing. Like, start with their problems and speak in terms that they care about and they can understand. And yeah, I'm curious. What is your approach? Maybe you have a different perspective.
No, I like that. I was thinking, so a lot of the times when we're sort of speaking to different clients, and the most common thing I hear, which again is literally the sentence I'm so sick of hearing, that they want to go agile because they want to go faster. And for me, coming from the governance, it's also so false. It doesn't actually make sense. And the reason it doesn't make sense is because a lot of these companies, usually those that are well established more so rather than your sort of startups, they've already got so much governance below and so much structure and rigidity. And so then they go in and they apply agile on top, thinking that they're going to be able to go faster because they've restructured their team to be one of the, top consulting models and whatever. They actually just complicate things a lot worse. And I think you're right by just talking and constantly bringing up agile, what agile is distracting us from doing the how, which is actually adapting, iterating, evolving, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think we're aligned, and that's definitely one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because I can see that from your posts, and I'm keen to understand, seeing some of the collateral and the content you've been posting lately, which is quite entertaining. Where do you get your inspiration for some of these posts?
Yeah. So this may sound really weird, right? Because I'm a product manager, but in the end, I write about what interests me. If I'm excited by it, if I get energy from it, then I'm not a great writer. Then I've got the best chance to make somebody feel the same excitement. And that's my starting point. So for example, yesterday I published a post because I was actually watching on YouTube. I was watching Edward Norton being interviewed at the University of Cambridge.
Okay.
And it was just very fascinating because he was talking about Fight Club and how it's actually the same movie as The Graduates. I don't know if you're into movies.
No, I've watched Fight Club, but I haven't watched The Graduates.
Oh, it's a very good movie. It's a romantic movie, and it's actually, I think, from the 60s. I could be wrong, maybe, but the interesting part is The Graduate. You probably know the song Mrs. Robinson, like say I don't remember the lyrics. But anyhow, the cool thing is in that movie, it's a romantic movie. I've seen both. I never made the connection, but when Edward Norton said that, I was like, and I was kind of inspired, and I wrote something, about the movie Fight Club and The Graduate. I'm not going to spoil anything.
Yes,
and
please don't.
That's it's just something that happens like a spark, and that's how I do it. There's not one right way of doing it, but that's a good way of explaining it. I agree with you, but one thing is you have to be open to listening, to looking, to hearing. So, you're open to these ideas, which is good. That means you're not married to your ideas. You're open to other perspectives, which I think is really great. And correct me if I'm wrong, you started writing, even though you were told, was it one of your secondary school teachers that told you? Yeah. She it was my Dutch teacher, and she said, like, you should never become a writer because basically you suck. And I was like thinking, okay, but the thing is, I always loved writing so much that I didn't really care what anybody thought. I mean, who cares if it's shit, or if I like it? That's the win already.
Exactly. You're expressing yourself. And remind me, you started writing because you were reviewing some tech gadgets that you were receiving and you were getting for free, and you decided to start writing.
Yes. Like, I don't know, 15, 16, something like that. Yeah. I was like, oh, this is a way to get free stuff. I'm going to write.
Amazing. And you know what, you say, you raise a good point. I think there's a lot of fear sometimes, and I'm sure there's people listening now that maybe watch this podcast or on YouTube or listen to it and probably think, oh, I want to do what you're doing and I want to write, and maybe a bit scared to take that first step. But correct me if I'm wrong, you probably are writing better now than you did when you were 15, because you continuously iterated and practiced and apply that agile principles by learning and improving on the way.
Yeah, I hope so. Like, I mean, it's so difficult to say, right? But I think my writing has improved a lot and it's still improving. And yeah, but it doesn't even really matter. That's not why I do it. I just like it a lot. If I wouldn't have nobody reading it, I would still enjoy it. It still is like, and sometimes it can be disappointing because you hope, right, that some people read it and find it interesting. And sometimes you just have an article where you put a lot of effort in and nobody cares.
Yes.
Oh, that's okay. But I mean, how can I say? I think that I wish more people would just do what they like. I think that because at the end of the day, you're a thief of your own time, and what you get from it is joy. And of course, we all want to make money, right? But the joy that's priceless, and that's what nobody can take away.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. And speaking of writing, so I know that you've written a book, which is quite popular actually, and got a lot of good reviews. So Driving Value with Sprint Goals. One of the things I read was that you missed all the timelines for the book, except for the first 2 chapters. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And what's the book about in a bit more detail?
Yeah. So basically, when you write a book, you get a contract, and I don't know if every publisher works the same way, but I assume they're probably all going to work pretty the same way. So they want timelines, so there's a timeline there for the first 2 draft chapters for the full manuscript, and that's tough, right? Because I've never written a book. How the hell do you forecast timelines? So the other part of it, which makes it tough, is there's actually some clause in there that if you basically you're delayed, they can hire a ghostwriter to finish your book and pay that ghostwriter out of your future royalties.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So it's not going to be your book and you're never going to make any money out of it. That's basically the worst case scenario if you're late. And yeah, so you have this contract looming in your head. So what did I do? I worked for a weekend. I finished like 20%, and I said, okay, I can do it in 6 months. So I gave timelines, 6 months, finished the whole thing. So what happened is the first 2 chapters I had done over a weekend. So that's the only timeline I hit that was in the contract because it was already done before I signed the contract. And all the other timelines I missed. But here's the key thing, right? The publisher, I was regularly sending them chapters. They really liked what they were seeing. So I was actually telling them, hey, like, I'm going to miss all the timelines. And they said, don't worry about it. As long as you're producing stuff and it's good, that's the key thing. I think it's more kind of like contracts, they always contain these language as when everything goes to hell, they have an option, an out, to recoup some of the money. But at the end of the day, they want to make money, and the best chance is if I write the book, you know what I mean? Because if you find a ghostwriter, they may be a better writer, but they might not write a better book because they don't have the same understanding. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell.
So that's the risk that they have to take as well by bringing someone else in to finish your book. It sounds very similar to a Danish professor. We've done a lot of work with Denmark, and then one of the Danish professors says he literally, with all of his books and research writing, leaves it to the last minute. And I always wondered why, but yeah, I think that kind of concept of what you just described is probably more familiar than maybe some people realize. Well, good on you for finishing the book. Tell us, what's it about? I mean, obviously your title is a little bit clear in terms of what it means, but what made you drove you to write the book? What was it about that topic that you felt needed to get out into the world?
Yeah. So the key thing I wanted to write about is, if you look at most Scrum implementations or even Agile implementation in the world, they're very rigid, you know what I mean? And it's kind of like they try to follow a recipe, follow these steps, and then you're going to be adaptive, then you're going to be Agile. And I thought I thought that's one of the biggest problems in the Agile world today. And I actually wrote a book, which is about Scrum, but it isn't about Scrum. It is actually about how do you leverage goals to deliver more value. And it's really about how do you make your teams more adaptable, more flexible, and do the right thing in the moment. And that's also why the subtitle is like Humble Plans, Exceptional Results, because the basic idea is every step you take should help shape the way. So when you do the work, you discover what's going on, you can adapt. And that's the key thing. And what's interesting is I rarely talk about Scrum. I rarely talk about Scrum Masters, you know what I mean, or what the product owner does. I just really try to focus on, okay, so you've got a team, they've got a mission, they are working towards a goal. How does that help? Why is that important? And why is it even crucial for an Agile way of working? And that's what my book is about. It could have just as well been called Driving Value with Goals, you know what I mean? And I just felt very passionate about it because yeah, we get so distracted by all these events, and people even mistakenly call them rituals and ceremonies, but we get so distracted by all that stuff that we forget about focusing on what is the only thing that matters. And that's kind of like, hey, this is the goal we're working towards. How do we get closer to that goal? What's the next best step we can take? And all those events and values are just a means to an end to help you do that better. And that's why we should start the other way around. We should not start with all the events and do this, but this is the goal. And how do we get closer to that? That's the key thing. And I think we get so distracted from that. And that's why I felt compelled to write this book. I want to see more flexibility and adaptability and less rigidity, like, hey, this is what the Scrum Guide says, or this is what the Agile Manifesto says. Because at the end of the day, we need to do the right thing at the right moment, and no book or recipe is going to tell you that.
No, because no one book anywhere in the world, manifesto included, can know your culture, your environment, the maturity, the past experience, the people, all of that stuff. So how could you possibly apply even the best recipe books in the world, the way I'd cook versus maybe yourself or my husband or a friend, they're all going to be different outcomes. They're not going to look identical. So use it as a guideline effectively. You know what's really interesting? One of the things I've seen in some of the large banks that we have here, I've seen it mainly in the banks, but I'm sure it happens elsewhere, is I find, working in sort of the project management office space, usually we liaise with the Scrum Masters and the Agile coaches, but I was observing for a period of time with one of our clients, and I was just seeing the actual teams every sprint, every 2 week sprint, they were running in 2 week sprint, every 2 week sprint, they would run out of time to deliver everything they said they were going to deliver in the goal. And they would literally pick it up and they would move it to the next fortnight. And they would just continuously, and they did that for like 9 months. So what's your thoughts on that? And, is it best practice not to be moving between sprints, or like, what's your thoughts on that approach?
Well, what's interesting is I think there are different schools of thought, but for me, Agile is about being fluid and doing the right thing in the moment. And what I've observed very often is it's the final day of the sprint. Somebody wants to work on something valuable, and then they say, no, you cannot pick it up because you're not going to complete it. To me, that's absurd. You're not doing the right thing at the right moment. I mean, it could be that there are other more useful things that you could do, like work documentation. Please do that, right? But for me, I don't get that. I think you should always do the right thing at the right time. And if the right thing at the right time is a lot, so I'm much more in the camp of keeping the sprint flexible, and carryovers don't really matter as long as you're making the most progress towards your goals. So that's the key thing. So let's say you've got a sprint goal. I think one of the big problems is estimation, right? Our estimates are always wrong. That's kind of the big problem. So what you don't want to do, and this is what most Scrum teams actually do, is they start the sprint, they push in 10 tickets, right? Or 10 user stories with an estimate. So the problem is, before starting the sprint, you lack understanding. Your estimates, it might be 10 story points, but in the reality, the whole batch of work maybe is 50 story points or 60 story. So you're already doomed from the start. And that's why I think it's way more important that you keep your sprint flexible. You pull in work gradually based on the reality, how much work it really is. And then every sprint, you kind of have a feedback moment. Hey, how much progress did we make? Did we make more or less progress? But it's actually about the actual work you've completed, and not like the guess you pushed in at the beginning of the sprint. And that's why, for me, it's really crucial. Carryovers, I couldn't care less, as long as we're making the most progress towards our sprint goal, as long as we have good cycle time, you know what I mean? That's what matters. And yeah, so I'm in that camp. Sprint should be flexible, and every 2 weeks you just inspect and adapt. You see how you're doing. And yeah, you're sometimes going to get sidetracked. There's going to be a production issue and all these other things, but that's okay, right? But you keep your eyes on the prize, which is the sprint goal or the goal.
And you also don't want to wait to the end of them. I mean, most of the time I find that, their sprint's finished on a Wednesday. You don't want to wait till the day before the end of the sprint to then call out that you're going to have challenges in delivering whatever it is that you said you're going to deliver. And I just think there's a bit of a lack of understanding in relation to what was in the sprint. And, you mentioned estimation, and I know that you're very vocal about story points and you have a perspective on that. I've been in companies where they don't understand it, so they completely just dismiss it, say it doesn't work, it's completely crap, and then they'll just go with like t-shirt sizing. And then in others that are, absolutely all over story points. So what side of story points to you works, and why is it so misunderstood?
Yeah, I mean, story points are just incredibly complex, right? You just ask someone, how do you define a story point? And you get all kinds of different answers. I think, so for me, I'm more in the Mike Cohn camp, right? He just says story points are about effort, how much work it represents. You can story point bugs. Some people even say you can story point anything that represents work, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got risk, you've got complexity, you've got uncertainty. They all influence effort, but they're not enough. So you cannot say story points are equal to complexity, because sometimes you've got to do very simple stuff, but it's a lot of work. So I think story points can be useful. I think one of the main things is the team decides, and it's for them. And I think the business, they should not worry about velocity, because at the end of the day, if you read the history of velocity, it's based on ideal days. So how it started was a team, an XP team with Ron Jeffries. They were using ideal days, and the business didn't get it. What? You planned 30 days. So why didn't you finish those 30 idle days? Well, because we've got other meetings and blah, blah, blah. So the business didn't get it. So what did Ron Jeffries do? He was very smart. He just said, we're going to multiply it by 3 and call it points. Then nobody knows the time it represents, and then they'll get off our back. But yeah, so it was good intentions,
right? It was to confuse the business.
Yes, to kind of like get the business off the back. But then people actually started weaponizing it and thinking, wait, these are points. The sky is the limit. We can achieve more points.
Exactly.
And that's where it went wrong, because that's kind of as stupid as saying, hey, the team has 100 ideal days, right? They have a total, like potentially they can do 100 days of work in the sprint. I'm just making up a number.
Yep.
And then now we're saying they can do 200 ideal days. That's absurd, right? But that's what we're doing in velocity. And that's where it kind of went wrong.
Yeah.
So I think the estimation approach really doesn't matter. You can use ideal days, you can use story points, you can do simulations, no estimates. I think it all doesn't really matter. I think the key thing is you should tell the business, what are you working on? When do you roughly expect it to be done? And whether it's generated using gummy bears or story points or no estimates,
or corgis.
Nobody cares.
Or corgis. You did a post about corgis. Corgis as well.
It doesn't matter. And I think that's where it goes wrong. Like I don't care about the estimation approach. And I think the business shouldn't care either. They care about the forecasts. And
well, they care about how their money is being spent. If they're funding, a persistent team, and they're obviously investing in whether it's a product owner in the team is a part of developing out whatever it is they're developing, and they're putting in SME time and expertise and all that sort of stuff, they're going to care about the outcome. And so they have to understand how you're working so that they can fit into that. Otherwise, it's like chalk and cheese.
Yeah, no, you're right. They have to understand. But I think one of the big mistakes is, in the end, right, software development needs exploration and innovation. It's not assembly line work. And that's one of the big problems I see, is there's so much pressure on teams to deliver stuff.
Yeah.
That, I mean, if you see these teams that are just focused on delivering, they don't talk to customers, they don't validate stuff. No. Because everybody's just putting pressure on them to deliver things, to deliver features. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes. Maybe you get a higher ROI in terms of feature delivery, but the biggest mistake is building a feature that isn't used. That is so expensive. It's a parasite. It's going to get support tickets. You're going to get questions from sales. Every future feature is going to be slower because you're building on a bigger code base. It's just setting you up for failure. And I think that's the biggest mistake I see. When you focus on squeezing all the story points out of the team, you're just going to get more features. And it's just as stupid as my book, right? Imagine I would have focused on writing as many pages as possible. That's not what it's about.
No, absolutely. And, one of the things that you mentioned is you can sit there and spend all your resource, time and effort on building features, but not only is what the development team is developing matters, it's also how you go to market, how you do the marketing, how you do the sales, how you integrate operations, the governance, all of that stuff. So who cares if the development team delivers all the features if it's not integrated, it's not sold properly, it's not, all of that sort of stuff embedded in the company, then you've just wasted, and you're going to have to go back and redo it. And that was a prominent problem with a home loan program that I was part of in one of the banks, where I think you call it the feature factory. They were obsessed with features, and they would break down the features to such a minute level of detail so they can acknowledge that they've done, 50, 100 every quarter, whatever it might have been. So how do you help teams beat the feature factory, and tell me a bit more about what the feature factory is?
Yeah, so feature factory, I think it's a concept coined and popularized by John Cutler. And it's companies that just obsessively focus on shipping features. And what I always say, like delivering a feature is like telling a joke. It doesn't matter unless it makes people laugh, right? So it needs to, so it's not about the feature, it's about what the feature makes possible.
Yes.
And I've worked at a startup and I've seen this problem firsthand. So basically, they were building a SaaS product and it was configurable. And if you would go to the configuration menu, there were like 200 checkboxes with settings that the customer couldn't see, but 200, and some of them you were not allowed to turn on at the same time. So this is the feature factory, right? Like you just have a product, it can do everything. It's a Swiss Army knife. But yeah, you're cannibalizing your own product because basically you cannot please different kinds of customers because they've got very different needs. So in the end, in the feature factory, the idea is the more features you deliver, the more value you deliver, which is just like I said, it's just as nonsensical as the more words you write, the better the book is. Actually, what you want to do is deliver as little features as possible, and make as much as a difference as possible. And because the less features you have, the smaller your code base, the lower the infrastructure costs, the quicker it will be to add new features. But I think the hard part is figuring out what are the features that are going to make a difference. But that's where our effort should be, because writing code is a very slow and expensive way to find out that you're wrong, So you should do cheap things. You should actually make prototypes and you should talk to customers and really understand, what are you trying to achieve? Could you show me how you're doing this today? And yeah, what very often happens in these feature factories, there's just somebody from sales that says, hey, we need a Google Calendar integration. And then what happens in these companies? Okay, we're going to build a Google Calendar integration.
Yeah.
And then they build a Google Calendar integration, and then nobody uses it because nobody knows why we even built it in the first place. And that's a feature factory, in a nutshell. So how do you help that? You need to start with the problems, right? And there's this story which I think very beautiful encapsulates it. It's actually, so nowadays, right, if you go to an elevator, all of them have mirrors, right? There was a time where none of the elevators had mirrors. So what changed? Why did suddenly all these elevators get mirrors? So there was a hotel in New York, and one of the big challenges they had in this hotel was that it was an old building and everybody was waiting for these elevators. So the hotel was lovely, but the hotel manager just constantly kept getting complaints. The elevators are slow. It's taking too long. And he had looked into it, right? It's going to cost millions of dollars to fix this problem because you need to change your building. It's just super expensive. But then what's very interesting, there was like a young student there, a psychology student, and he actually said, what if the problem isn't that they're waiting so long, but that they're bored while they're waiting? What if we just add a mirror so people can look at themselves and look whether they look sharp and they have something to do, And they added the mirrors and all the complaints evaporated.
Wow.
And this is just, and this is just a simple example, right? It's about what's the problem and what you're trying to solve. And then, and then you could have spent the millions, never made that money back. Or if you really focus on the problem, you can come up with something brilliant like this mirror, which every elevator has nowadays.
Oh, I love that analogy. I'm going to use that in a post, and I'll make sure I credit you for raising it to my attention. That's a really funny one. With thinking about your example of the Google Calendar, what I thought when you were saying that was like, what if they end up replacing Google like next month? But I actually seen in an organization where one team was building, and it was a manufacturing sort of software. They were building some manufacturing software. There was a significant project for their size, about $500,000. And as they got like 6 months into the development of this software, they realized that they were going to have to make some changes because there's a risk associated with the project continuing. And what they found out was there was another project in the same company that they didn't realize another team was doing that was absolutely going to completely wipe out the relevance of this software project. Like, it's just bananas. And so that's where I like to play. I like to help align all the different teams so they're all on the same page with what they're doing. But one of the things I was going to ask in relation to that is like where we know the business, like I like to say that the business just generally struggles to understand the concepts of project management fundamentally, right? We spend so long trying to educate them on project management, and it's not their job to know that. Then you have this thing called Agile, which even the best of us sometimes are confused about what kind of Agile people are talking about and yada, yada, yada. So what do you recommend, particularly because you are a product manager, what do you recommend as some techniques or tips to engage the business better without overloading and confusing them, but getting them on board that journey?
Yeah. So I think one of the big challenges is the moment you start kind of, for example, let's say the business comes to you, right? We need a Google Calendar. If you immediately start questioning them, right, they will get really defensive because they're kind of get the feeling like, oh, well, he's not like they are not taking my request seriously, or they're doubting whether I know my stuff. And I think what I always try to do is just ask questions, like try to get them to put all the cards on the table. Like, oh, that's a great idea. How did you get that idea? Just extract information. And then you begin asking questions, not why, but like, okay, so who's going to use it? Okay, how does it fit in their daily work? What are they doing at the moment? Usually you'll hear, we don't know. Like, okay, so maybe we should talk to them. You know what I mean? And because at the end of the day, what I really try to hammer home is it's not about what we build, it's how what we build enables them to do something better or differently, like the progress it grants them in their lives. So we have to start there. And yeah, I try to involve them even in this conversation. We just have a call. And I actually did this, for example, for this Google Calendar integration example. I actually went on a call with the customer. And I just said, because look, I want to build this Google Calendar integration, but I cannot build it unless I understand how are they working at the moment? What are they doing? So we hopped on a call, and she just was a woman I was talking to, and she just told me, this is what I do every day. And she showed me like, yeah, I would like to. And basically the problem wasn't, I need a Google Calendar integration. The problem was, I want to know what everybody is working on in each day, right? And when it's expected to be done. Very different problem. Doesn't need a Google Calendar integration.
Yeah.
And those examples, you give a presentation in the company, right? Where you actually say like, look, we had this request, and then we actually talked, and then we found we needed this. And this is why we should always talk about, okay, what problem are we trying to solve, and why, how are they currently doing it? Because then we can better help you. We're not experts in the world of the customer, right? They know it best, but that's why we need to be humble and listen to them, because then we can build a solution that's going to help them actually do a better job. And yeah, we cannot skip that part. And yeah, repeat, and slowly you will get there. But I think it starts with respecting them. You know what I mean? Not just saying you're not providing me what I need. You're giving them a feeling that they're stupid, because that doesn't work. So you need to meet them where they are, and yeah, intent curiosity.
And I think you should meet them where they are and like speak their language. You know, don't go in there talking to them about story points and blah blah blah. Like that's, if they don't understand that, you're going to confuse them before you even get started. You, like I said, just want to extract the information that then you can go play back to the relevant teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the crucial part. And then what I also think is, sometimes you're blindsided, right? You get a request where you're like, your initial feeling is, this doesn't make any sense. This is going to be a huge amount of work. And if you tell that immediately to them, they will feel bad, you know? So what I then tend to do is I just let it sink in, start asking questions, like I said before. And then I said, okay, I need to think a little bit about it. And then you get back to them, and then you can tell it when you're not as emotional, giving it some thought. You can give them a few questions, and then generally they'll realize, oh, wait, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. But you're preserving the relationship. And I think that's really important.
And I think, you know, sometimes in some of the larger organizations, I know working with product managers, it's quite difficult necessarily to get to every single stakeholder. So, you know, one of the ideas, and I'm keen to see if you've got any ideas for those listening in this space, but one idea was, you know, one product manager was going out individually to different people across a 2-week period, you know, to show a prototype or to get feedback or, you know, whatever it might be. only to realize that there you go, you've lost 2 weeks or a sprint or whatever it might be. So then we sort of suggested to her, why don't you go the other way? Why don't you, host a 1 or 2 hour session, invite all of the proposed stakeholders, whether they think they need to come or not, include a little memo on that, explaining what the purpose of that call is. They get to decide if they think there's any value for them. And then you basically save yourself 2 weeks of work. So we did that, and that actually saved a lot of time. Is there any sort of tips or tricks or techniques you use, perhaps maybe in this space or when doing sprint goals, for example, that you could share with listeners?
Yeah, so one technique I think is really powerful is using something like story mapping, where you just even involve some of the stakeholders, where you actually start talking about what is the journey of the user, what is their goal, what are all the steps they're doing, and it's not about the product. And then you start talking about, okay, so we understand the journey, it starts here, it ends here, this is what they're trying to achieve. And then you start talking about the product, and then you start making, and then that really helps with generating this common understanding. Hey, we're not here just to build features, but that actually it starts with this person that's trying to, I don't know, plan a project or write hours, whatever they're trying to do. And how do we fit in that world? And I think that's a really powerful starting point, because suddenly they understand the choices you have to make and why you're doing things a certain way. Yeah, I think, and like you said before, like if you do Scrum, you've got a sprint review every 2 weeks. Every 2 weeks, talk about, hey, like how are we delivering value? You don't have to demo every feature, you know what I mean? And yeah, I think these things can be extremely helpful.
I think that's a really good one, and this links into, I'm sure, your road mapping, sort of thinking about road mapping and sort of setting up and evaluating and developing really good, strong product roadmaps. What are some common pitfalls that usually happen for companies trying to put in place good product roadmaps?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest problems I see in companies is high work in progress. So companies are just unwittingly working on too many things at once.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's very interesting, because actually many managers believe it's a good thing. If everybody's busy, right,
Mm-hmm.
that's good. But actually, if everybody's busy, that's bad. And
Yeah.
that's a very, and the way to explain it, it's kind of like if you're at the supermarket and the person at the cash register is 100% busy,
Mm-hmm.
the supermarket is going to lose money, because there are people that are going to see the line and just going to be like, screw that, I'm going to go home and I'll come back another time. Yeah. So that's why the supermarkets are always focused on, we don't want to have a line. We don't want the person at the cash register, the cashier, to be 100% busy. We want them to be like 70% busy, because that means the customers are flowing through. The same kind of mentality we should also have with our roadmaps. So the biggest problem I see is we make a roadmap for 1 year based on estimates, which are guesses made before we start. And then we've already committed to the huge chunk of work. And the problem is, let's say our capacity is 100%, right? So the first problem is we plan probably around 100% of our capacity, because we think these are the most valuable things, but we don't take into account all the surprises. There's stuff that we're going to miss. Marketing needs something, production issues. So, but to make things even worse, our estimates can be extremely wrong. It could be that first project, which only takes 2 months, it takes 4 months, right? And that's just because it was so much more work than we had anticipated, because the code base contains technical debt, or because the API we wanted to use cannot be used, so we need to build some kind of middleware, or all kinds of reasons. And then after the first month, everything on the roadmap will be delayed, because if the first thing is finished, I can guarantee you cascading effects, almost everything is going to be. So I think the biggest mistake companies make is, I would say, there needs to be less on there, right? Because you can always do more things, but the moment you overcommit, you're actually going to do less, and you're going to be frustrating. So there needs to be less on there. The other thing is, don't try to plan 1 year in full detail all the stuff you're going to be doing, because maybe that first thing you've delivered is way more valuable than you had anticipated. Maybe you want to double down on that. There needs to be room for this adaptiveness. And if there isn't room for the adaptiveness, then yeah, why are we doing Agile? You know, like if we just want, because, and I think that's the hard part. Like, our brains are really good at predicting and planning, seeing this beautiful roadmap gives us the illusion of control. It makes us feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Just admitting we don't know how valuable it is. We don't know exactly how long it's going to take. That's probably closer to reality. And that's what our roadmap should reflect to some extent, at least for the stuff we're going to be working on longer than 3 months from now, because who knows what's going to happen. And that's what your roadmap should take into account. Maybe a bit of a fuzzy answer, right? But
no, it's fine. I could take a lot from that. So, thinking about the annual planning. So annual planning, I find, so I don't think any company I've dealt with, and has been at least 30 in the last 20 years, are pure agile. None. Why? Because many of them still do their annual cycle financial planning and things like that. So that's one. So their roadmap probably annually maps to their financials and whatnot. The second thing that kind of stood out for me is, you talked about 100% capacity. It's really interesting because we were working in a client environment, and the vendor, the large vendor on this program of work, was actually refusing to give estimates beyond 2 weeks in advance. They believe that they will only estimate every 2 weeks. And it's, as a vendor who's providing services over a period of 1 or 2 years, like, that was quite ridiculous. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that I thought of, and I wonder whether is a technique that may be relevant in this road mapping space, is, as the concept of like must have, should have, could have, the Moscow concept, is that something that you would typically use in narrowing down that work in progress list, or?
No, not really. Like, I think the key thing there is, so let's say we've got one project that we're working on, right? And you have this vendor, which is really difficult because they don't want to give an estimate. So I think the key thing there is you do need to have some kind of estimate, but don't waste time on it, right? So you just say, okay, this is the thing. Probably it's going to take 9 months, whatever it is, right? And I think the biggest mistake companies make is start with a first milestone, you know what I mean? And really estimate that, break that down. And if that milestone is estimated 2 months and it's going to take, usually it takes 4 months or whatever, then you update the timeline. And then you tell them, hey, the rest is going to take 12 months. They're not going to like it, right? But that's the reality. It's kind of like a weather forecast. You've got better information. And then you can indeed talk about scope. Are we going to make, and I don't really use Moscow or these things. I really try to focus on what are we trying to achieve here? What's the outcome? What's the smallest valuable outcome? And what is the scope related to that? You know what I mean? Because the thing is, the moment you start talking about features, I've been there. It's very often must have, because everything is important. But the moment you
becomes a must have.
Yes.
Okay, fair.
So what I tend to do is more start like, how is it anchored in what this persona is using the product? So let's say it's a finance person. They're trying to close the month, for example. So maybe we just say, okay, we're going to enable them to close the month or whatever it is. What is the scope related to that? What is the smallest possible scope we can deliver? Because then you can, you can really have flexible scope discussions, you know what I mean? And the moment it's not anchored in the world of the user, then it can become very vague, because everybody thinks everything is important, because the sales guy will say, if these 10 things aren't in there, I cannot sell it. You know what I mean? But why can't you sell it? Well, because I say so.
Yeah, that's a challenge, because you're right. If you use that sort of concept, everything's going to be a must-have. If you don't use that concept and you do what they normally do, and that is put everything in there anyway, and without it, they will argue that they. So it's like, it's really challenging. So I think it's like maybe putting, like, there's a fixed, depending on what kind of ways of working you're using, there's a fixed capacity in the team, and that has to be taken into account. It's not unlimited, and therefore you can put everything in there. So I guess as long as there's a way to connect what the capacity is versus however you want to score the work, then I guess you bring the two together, and perhaps you can get people on board that. But you're right, you definitely need to be adaptive. And if you're not, and you've got a fixed hard date, then you're not running agile. And so you definitely got to make up your mind early on.
Yeah. And I think one of the crucial things there is, so I've worked on projects that have been delivered on time, and products I've worked on that have been terribly delayed. And the projects that were delivered on time, you know what they all had in common?
What?
They delivered something early that works.
Yep.
So I think one of the biggest indicators that projects are late is, and it's very obvious, right? If you like, they're working on for 4 months, there's nothing on production, you can't see everything. That's the moment you're screwed. That's the moment it's going to be. So all the effort, I think, when starting a project, we should really think about how can we deliver something as early as possible that works. Because the projects, and really soon, like I'm talking something in like 1 month or 6 weeks, you have something that works. And that, because that makes everything else easier, because you've got something that works, you've got a UAT environment, you've got production, the QAs can start testing sooner. And the problem is all the other projects that I've seen that are very delayed, then you've got the late integration problem. Suddenly everything has to come together. And yeah, the last 10-20%, that's where you're screwed. So you want to get to that last 10-20% as quickly as possible.
And you also want to make sure that what it is that you're delivering quickly is something that I guess is tangible enough for the business to understand. Like they're not going to care if you said we developed 100 lines of code. They're going to be like, whatever, I can't see that. One thing that I see as a common recurring issue in organizations that are less mature in their agile journey, I'm keen to see if you've got some thoughts on this, is they typically, they'll have all the different scrum teams, and they'll have limited, say, testers or limited developers or whatever type of resource that's limited. And so they'll have, say, for example, tester John Smith, he'll be split across, in this example, there's 4 value streams, and they've got multiple different teams members within each value stream. But because there's only limited testers, they'll put, John Smith tester across 3 of the 4 value streams. And then that tester is split and spread across. Like, what's your thoughts on that? Is that just a recipe for disaster?
I mean, there's this quote, I think it's from the goal, and it's any progress improvement not at the bottleneck is an illusion.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I like
so
that
what's
one.
the bottleneck? It's QA. So the example I use, I always talk about coffee, right? Imagine you've got a coffee shop, and you've got a barista, and the barista can make 400 espressos per hour. And you've got somebody who's great at making cappuccinos. They can make 200 cappuccinos per hour. How many cappuccinos per hour are you going to make? 200. There's no point in adding another barista that can make espresso. So in this case, you're wasting a lot of time, burning money to deliver something at the speed of the QA of that one person spread over 3 projects. That's the bottleneck. So what's the solution? More QAs, right? Or let developers do some of the QA. You tell the QA, hey, you're going to coach the developers. And if they're like crucial stuff, right, where there's money involved, or you're going to do it. But actually your job is going to be that you remove your own bottleneck, like that's your job. Is it optimal still? Probably not, right? But I think the alternative is just folly. It's trying to run an espresso shop where you can make 400 espressos, but you've got, someone who can only make 200 cappuccinos per hour. Yeah. So you're screwed. You're only going to deliver 200 cappuccinos, and you're paying all these people to not deliver anything. That's a waste of money. And that's what you should be talking about. And I think it's really difficult. I've been in this situation very often.
I see that a lot, and I like that analogy. What I thought of when you were describing, I was like, imagine having one person run that is the barista across 4 coffee shops.
Yeah. It's even simpler.
Or even two coffee shops, and having to keep track, and then they wonder. But you're right. Either if they can upskill colleagues 100%, and maybe they can do 80% of the role, they potentially can increase the budget and the count of people in the team, which is often the option they don't want to go with, because they don't want to do that. They don't want to add to head count. Or option 3 is they have to reduce scope or delay the completion of certain scope or features to a later point in time. So there is options. They just don't want to listen to them, do they?
No, they just want it now. It's just absurd, because at the end of the day, you've got a team, right? It's kind of saying you've got a striker he's playing on 3 different teams.
Yes.
And then you're like, okay, let's call him. We need to score a goal. Let's call the striker. The striker's going to come for 50 minutes.
Exactly.
And
Even if we had like
goal.
Ronaldo on our team, it would be like trying to spread him across even with his talent, it wouldn't work anyways. There you go. Funny story. So just surrounding out, thinking about, you write a lot about obviously Agile and Scrum and all of these different topics. What are you seeing as like a significant trends? Is it, tech related, is AI related? Like, what are you seeing as the trends happening now?
Well, I think AI is obviously a trend. I mean, but it's going to be very interesting. I think the next upcoming 5-10 years, there are very different perspectives. So some people say artificial general intelligence is really near, right? Next 10 years, it's happening. Elon Musk is even saying it's happening the next years. I don't know, right? I'm not an expert in AI. I want to stress. At the moment, based on what I'm seeing, I'm in the camp. It's not happening. I just don't. I'm not in the happy camp. It's amazing. I see it used for all kinds of stupid use cases. I'm not that impressed. I mean, I'm impressed compared to what was possible before, right? But I don't think it's that good. So time will tell, right? Maybe I'm wrong. I'm definitely not an expert, so I could be very wrong.
Neither am I.
But if you look in the realm of Agile, what I'm kind of seeing is more and more Scrum criticism. I think people are kind of tired of Agile and Scrum. That's kind of the feeling I'm getting. I'm also curious to hear your perspective. But that's kind of
seeing that criticism with SAFe and sort of models like SAFe. I'm seeing some either in the absolute hate it camp to the love it, but I'm finding more people are getting, even though it's like I think the fastest growing before Scrum, I think SAFe is. I'm finding a lot of people are sort of feel burnt out by it. That's what I'm hearing anyway.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think so. Basically, we had like the Wild West of Agile, right? Before the Agile Manifesto. I think that's how Jim Highsmith calls it.
Yep.
Then we kind of had the copy paste Agile era, right? Where everybody was kind of looking for boxes to copy paste, like SAFe and Scrum. And I think now we're going to go into the agnostic Agile era, like where people are like, I don't care whether it's called Scrum or it's called SAFe. We have patterns. They work in specific situations, and we're going to try those patterns, and we're going to figure out something that works in our situation. So I think that's what I'm hoping is happening, because I really believe Scrum and SAFe, they were helpful because they kind of made people realize like there are all these kind of different toolboxes and stuff that you could be doing. But I don't think it makes sense to say you have to do this. This is the framework. No, like you don't want to do a daily Scrum, don't do a daily Scrum. And then of course in the Scrum world they always say, yeah, but you can do that. Scrum doesn't say you can do it, right? Yeah. Okay, great. But I think everything should just be a pattern. Like there's no need for a bundle of patterns because all we see is hate, dogma, fighting. SAFe Scrum is not the same as Scrum. And I think the moment we move away towards patterns, then we're still going to have arguing like, should we use story points or no estimates? But yeah, those are, I think, less bad. And well, I'm curious to hear what you think.
more so that as people, both those people that are complaining and saying that it's not this and just want to debate all day long, with not constructively, I'd say they're just not delivering. So that's probably why they've got the time to complain and say all these things. I agree. One of the things that I've been driving for at least the last 6-7 years since setting up AMO was my view is around adaptive governance. So one thing that happened about 6-7, I'd say maybe 8 years ago, I originally set up AMO because in working in the large banks, they were trying to figure out how they blend sort of agile ways of working and governance versus, the traditional ways of working governance. So I was trying to help them find the conduit. And over the last few years, I've found that the best approach when it comes to governance is changing the how, not the what, because governance is governance no matter where I am in the world. Yeah. And so I think it's more changing the how and being adaptive. And it's not based on any, method or process or framework. It is simply what will work for that company at that time and making sure everyone's on the same page with it. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah. And that's the future, I think. I hope. But maybe not. Maybe we're just too attached to the shiny frameworks, and being able to say I'm a Scrum Master, I'm a safe SPC.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's gonna stay this way forever. I could be wrong.
Maybe. I definitely we'll have to ask one of the people on LinkedIn that has about 15 tags on their surname. They can't keep up with the number of certifications they've got. So we've got Maarten, we've got a tradition to ask a final question, and basically it's simply, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners? A call to action, a piece of advice, or a question to ponder before we wrap up today?
I just like to challenge people, like, whenever you're thinking we should do it this way because Safe says so or Scrum says so, don't do that thing that the Scrum guide says or what Safe says. Like, try the thing you wanted to try out, see if it works. Maybe you'll be confirmed, right? And what Safe or Scrum says is great, but maybe you had a great idea. So don't worry so much about adhering to any guide. In the end, it's reality what matters. And I think that's what we should be doing more, like trying stuff out, because even innovation comes from trying stuff out, even when we believe it's not going to work. And yeah, all these guides were written by fallible human beings like you and me. They're described in a fallible way. So that's why I think it's really dangerous if we kind of try to stick to them and stifle our creativity and imagination. It's okay to be wrong, and yeah, we should acknowledge that more. Like, we should try to be wrong more often, because if we're never wrong, we're never going to innovate.
I love it. Experiment more. There you go. Said by a true agilist. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time. This has been great having you on board. We're actually out of time, but I know we could have kept talking. I say that to all my guests, maybe because I just like asking a lot of questions. But thank you. I really appreciate it, particularly your morning time over there.
And I appreciate you doing it kind of after work hours. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Please share this with someone or rate it if you enjoyed it. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and to stay up to date with all things Agile Ideas, go to our website www.agilemanagementoffice.com. I hope you've been able to learn, feel, or be inspired today. Until next time, what's your Agile idea?